even though time is limited today, don't forget we're also going to eat lunch together. So essentially we'll be together until 2, and then I'm going to get you to another place where you have other meetings, and we're going to, if we still need to talk more tomorrow morning, I don't think that's scheduled. We're going to answer as many questions as we can.
But
So,
before studying, can we get the kind of annual reports or organizing charts?
we don't necessarily have annual reports, but we can get, we have year-end reports. We can try to get something together for you.
It means you don't have much written material besides the John Atlas book.
Wow, I can definitely do better than that.
And then actually we don't know well through just only such kind of books. So
well, once you get into the St. Claude office, which will be maybe the 2, we'll get some other material.
So we don't want to waste our time to question them. Oh, that's what we are kind of.
Right. So let me give you some sense of. So as you probably know from Ken, I founded Acorn, the community organization, in 1970. Worked there for 38 years. Left. Now, for the last number of years, I've directed Acorn International, which works in 13 countries all over the globe. Canada is the one that's most like the United States. We still do some projects in the United States. But most of the organizing we do are in mega slums. San Juan de Laragancho in Lima, Peru, Dharavi in Mumbai. We work in Bengaluru, in Delhi, in Korogochu, in Nairobi, and so forth and so on. In Nesa in Mexico City, the world's largest slum. So in some ways, coming from my experience with Acorn, where we organize low to moderate income families, housing issues, job issues. I was going back to my roots. I first started as an organizer of welfare recipients, people who, mothers with children, husbands may have been separated, never had them, divorced, whatever, but were getting at that point in the late 60s all of their support from the government. That's changed. We don't have the social services program, as my sociologist friend knows, that we used to have. But that's where I started. So in some ways, Acorn International, outside of Canada, Italy, and Prague, where we also work, has gone back to sort of our roots, dealing with very, very low-income families and those issues. I obviously also work with Local 100. We are an independent labor union representing service workers, school workers in Texas, public employees in Arkansas, and a mix of private sector workers, as Rosa and may have explained here. We founded Local 100 out of the Acorn experience. Actually, in 1980, we had a number of members who kept coming to monthly meetings at the community level, saying they had problems at their jobs. Working conditions were bad, wages were terrible. And we would then refer them to existing unions. If they were a hotel worker, we'd refer them to the hotel workers union, and then would see them a month, 2 months later, and they wouldn't have gotten a call. And sort of we learned from the outside that in the 80s, the organizing and growth capacity of American trade unions had gone down. They just didn't have an organizing department. So we, in some ways, were telling people, call somebody who didn't exist. So finally, in 1980, we just sort of by default decided we need to also figure out how to organize a different kind of union for lower wage workers who are sort of in between these. So that's how we ended up organizing home health care workers, home daycare workers, hospitality workers here in New Orleans, garbage workers, who in many cases were casual, temporary, contingent, informal, whatever. There are a million names for these workers now. Fast food workers, we organized. So we organized at that point local unions. And this is the manager of Fair Grinds, Steve Thornton, who you'll see from time to time, who is the master of this new empire for her. We really, in those days, and 30 years ago, pioneered the organizing of home health care workers, which really has been the only organizing, significant organizing success for trade unions in the United States over the last 30 years. Probably 500,000 new members have joined SEIU, AFSCME, and other unions in professions that didn't exist. Same for home daycare workers, which I'll explain if anybody's interested in.
In 1984, ULU was affiliated with SEIU.
Exactly. Acorn started this, as I explained, because Acorn was a membership organization. The members kept knocking on the door. We had to eventually say yes. But it didn't take long for us to realize that we grabbed an elephant by the tail, if you will. It's an English expression. We bit off way more than we could chew. It was a huge, when we organized home health care in Boston, we didn't realize that there were now hundreds of thousands of people doing that work around the country. We started organizing fast food workers in Detroit. There were millions of workers. And so hotel workers here, we just couldn't, we didn't have the capacity from Acorn to support building both a community organization and a labor union at the time. So we then affiliated merged all of our labor unions into SEIU. So Local 100 at that time was an SEIU affiliate.
So what is the leader personality of the 501c?
Right. So labor unions in the United States are set up as unincorporated associations of groups. They have no corporate status in the sense that you would normally be familiar. They're tax exempt based on not a 501c3 or C4, which is, I'm sure, a term you've heard in San Francisco about nonprofit, they can't lobby, whatever. But a member's dues are not tax exempt except as a business expense, but the proceeds of a union are not taxed as a profit-making concern. So that's what ULU is. We started ULU from 80 to 84, and then for almost 25, well, until 2009, 25 years, it operated, we operated as part of SEIU. In 2009, 2010, we went independent again.
Why?
That's a good question. And we'll get right to it. Okay, so Acorn, after I left in 2008, had two sets of external crises. The first had to do with voter registration in the Obama-McCain election. And this is the world perspective of this. Is I would be in Indonesia, working with organizations there, Urban Poor Consortium, and they would be so excited because they saw Acorn in the presidential debates of Obama and McCain. Well, what they were excited about was actually a huge crisis for Acorn because it was McCain accusing Obama and Acorn of essentially voter fraud, of trying to steal the election for Obama. Well, the truth of it was Acorn, through the years I was there, set up a massive, we don't have a good voter registration program in the United States. We're an industrial country, it's just a scandal. So everybody has to register, everybody has to, and if you don't, you're not allowed to vote. So there's no automatic ID, there's no automatic registration as you have in many countries. As you know, there's no mandatory voting as there is in 27 different countries. So you're forced, if you're going to get poor people to register, to have to run these incredibly expensive, this was a $20 million campaign in 2008, voter registration, everything involves thousands of people, and so you're going to have mistakes, and they had mistakes. And it became, the Republicans made it a huge issue. That sort of was a major problem that pinched the organization at the election time. When Obama was elected, I think they thought there was some breathing room. And then in 2009, in the fall of 2009, there was a video scam which tried to, it was very skillfully edited, James O'Keefe and Hannah Giles, and essentially it was an orchestrated campaign done against Acorn. We've done campaigns all of our lives, so we know how they work. Boom, this video thing starts trickling out over a week with these supposed interviews, I'll go back to those later, made it look like there were housing counselors connected with Acorn advising people in illegal ways to get houses for prostitutes or whatever. The next week, Congress passed resolutions trying to bar all funding from any government agency to any of 180 different organizations linked to Acorn, from radio stations to labor unions to whatever. I was in Toronto at that time, so I hardly even knew what was going on, working with our Canadian affiliate, and I started getting calls from the press and what was happening. But that Friday, when it all came out, the Secretary-Treasurer at that time of SEIU, was a long answer to a short question, I'm sorry. The Secretary-Treasurer of SEIU at that time, a woman named Anna Berger, was testifying before a congressional committee. She was asked point blank, what is your relationship with Acorn? She said, none. Well, Acorn had contracted to run organizing drives for SEIU. On the governmental reports SEIU filed, there was $4 million in contracts with Acorn the previous year. So she just sort of spoke without thinking. And so 2 days later, I got a call saying, the officers have been talking, and we know we owe Local 100 a lot of money, and we know you've been going in some different directions, you're trying to do some different things, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to let you be independent again. You're 25 years, you're just not part of SEIU, because they couldn't. I've been on the international board for 8 years. I left the international board to run this Walmart organizing drive, so we were joined together at the hip, and so the only way to keep this fiction, there was no relationship, was to get rid of Local 100, because not only was I had been the founder and Acorn chief organizer for 38 years, I was still the elected chief organizer of Local 100. So that was just PR.
So is ULU financially independent?
Yeah.
How?
Dues. 1.75% of gross income for every member we have on contract. We don't have the kind of money SEIU has.
So how much do members?
We have about 2,000 members in the local.
So it would depend, it could be a range from $15 a month to $50 a month. Well, maybe twice that.
So, and most of the workers we represent are on the lower wage scale. So if you're only making $10 an hour, let's say, and they're working full-time, which is 2,080 hours here in the United States, so you're making, let's say, 21,000, less than 21,000, your dues would be 20,000 times 1.5%. So essentially, over a year, you'd be paying like $250 for the dues, or $20 a month. So that's how it works. So that, I didn't mean to get off the side, but you asked one of those questions. There's no short answer. What happened? When I got the phone call from Eliseo Medina, who's now the executive, he's now the secretary-treasurer. I said, look, because I know you could have tried to merge us with some other local, or you could have tried that there's a procedure called trusteeships here, which essentially would have been taking all the members out, and all you're saying is we can go back to being independent, keep our members, and keep our contracts. Thanks. Good deal. Sayonara, good luck, we'll see you. So we still get along with many of them, but we're just not part of SEIU. So that was a brave new world we jumped into. So we have Acorn International. Obviously, we have the experience with Acorn, which also intersects with some of what you're interested in. We have both the labor and community experience with both community benefit agreements. So we have, and then you'll be meeting with other people that are more based in the community. And this first meeting, I brought our union people together because it was a good segue. But we're pretty much open to talking about whatever. Ken, I don't know how we're going to organize this thing, because luckily you've got a million questions. So we could just start with those questions. I don't know where we want to jump in. How was your trip to San Francisco? Did it work out well?
Yeah. Yeah, so I have a question related to
Good,
this.
sounds good. Want to start with our question?
But now I would like to make it more precisely for well know about your organizations, about like annual or year-round schedule, what kind of things your organization doing in a year or in a monthly, in a weekly, in a daily. So through the books, we don't have any such kind of information. So
You're interested on the union side, community organizing side, both?
both.
Both, okay. You want to start on the union side, and then I'll help out on the other.
Yes. One of our priorities is that we focus a lot on growth. So on a daily, we want our members, our sites, our workers, whether it's during their work time. I'm sorry. So whether it's during their break time at work or house visits. Sometimes doing meetings, okay?
How many offices do you visit in a year?
In a year?
Yeah.
That's so far out of the well, actually, that's a hard question to say by a year. I think that could end by.
In a week.
In a week, it all depends on, if you're catching people or if you're, if they're home or, So, a frequent back and forth, you can visit the same house
Yeah.
2 or 3 times in that day or each day in that week, trying to figure out when are they home or when are they not. One of the things that I take note of a lot is in order to try and catch them if I'm not reaching them at home and at work, is make a note or document the fact that I went there at 10 o'clock in the morning twice and they were not there. So at that point, maybe I should switch the scene and try going there in the afternoon, because apparently they must, until you can build up data that kind of describes where people are and when, to try to figure out their shifts. Another thing that works as far as the workers is getting other workers involved. Getting the workers that you're speaking with to do what we call referrals of other workers.
Recruitment. You better explain what right to work is. So we understand how that problem.
Okay, in our organizing world here, it is a work the right state in Louisiana. People have the right to actually be in the union, and they also have the right not to be in the union. But on the other hand, the union have and must represent them whether they're an actual member or not. Okay, so back to the referrals or the recruiting workers. In trying to build, I think that getting referrals plays a big part, because whether it's working along with the existing or not, you still need to pretty much know what you're working with, who's at your work site, who else worked where you work in your locations. In some areas of our organization, there's several different facilities under the same contract. For instance, I don't care where you might have 10, 15 different locations. So at each location that you meet someone, you want to get those referrals out of there to try to figure out how many people there are, who they are, names, and try to get numbers and everything so that you can actually start building more to it in order to continue to do the house visits. Okay. Even though the company will give you a list at some point of all the workers, but that changes over time, and they are not as updated as our data is. So working with house visits and site visits, doing house visits, site visits, where they check, where they cash their checks, or where they do lunch, are all ways of contacting workers and getting to know who they are, where, you know, and how to have a more accurate contact information on how to locate them at any time, you know, consistently doing that day if you're out working toward recruiting more workers.
You also have grievances and campaigns.
Right, so there's the organizing, and then there's representing workers when they're written up, suspended, fired, or just generally have an issue in the workplace. So whether it's a health and safety issue or a, you know, disagreement with management or whatever. So then we have grievances, and then you know, meetings with workers amongst amongst a company. So we like to do monthly meetings. And Rosa spent a lot of time last week and preparing for it within the last number of months to go to trial, because when we have, you know, and y'all know this about unions, but when you get to a point where you can't come, where you're not moving forward, the company refuses to bargain, you have to go to labor board, file charges. So they've had a case pending for the last number of years with one company who has not paid us the dues for all the members that we represented in the sanitation workers, subcontracted sanitation department. So she spent the majority of last week in court trying to get them to.
So the labor model in Japan, which is corporatist, ours is an adversarial model.
Yeah, I have a serious question.
Yeah, okay.
So under the NLRA or Labor Union Act here, I think that the domestic workers are excluded from the protection of the NLRA. That means according to my understanding, the domestic workers have the right to bargain collectively with the employers.
Okay, here's the story on domestic workers.